I never thought a Christmas gift could tear my family apart and then rebuild it stronger. Our annual gift exchange had been a tradition for decades at my parents' suburban home outside Chicago. As the youngest of three siblings, I had always felt the need to prove my worth, especially to my older brother James. This year was different. I knew he was struggling financially after losing his job, so I decided to give him 3 months of covered rent. I thought it would bridge the gap between us. I was wrong. Before continuing this story about a Christmas gift that made my entire family regret their actions, let me know where you are watching from, and hit subscribe to follow the most heartfelt, real-life stories on this channel. Growing up as the youngest in a family of achievers was never easy. At 33 years old, I still carried the weight of childhood memories where I constantly stood in the shadow of my older siblings. James, 2 years, my senior, was particularly difficult. As children, he made sure I knew my place in the hierarchy, whether it was taking credit for my accomplishments, excluding me from games with his friends, or making subtle comments that undermined my confidence during family gatherings. James had mastered the art of putting me down. My parents, hard-working middle-class Americans who built their lives from nothing, unintentionally fueled this dynamic. Dad, a construction manager, always praised James for his natural leadership abilities, while Mom, an elementary school teacher, defended his actions as just normal sibling rivalry. When I complained about being left out or targeted, the consistent response was that I needed to toughen up or that I was being too sensitive. School provided little respite. James was a star athlete who effortlessly attracted friends and admiration. Teachers who had taught him would look at me with expectation in their eyes, only to show disappointment when I gravitated toward computers instead of sports. I found solace in technology, spending hours learning to code, while James collected trophies that decorated our living room. By the time I entered high school, we had established an unspoken agreement to exist in parallel universes. He attended football games and parties. I joined the robotics club and built my first computer from spare parts. The divide between us grew wider with each passing year, solidified by little comments at dinner tables about my lack of social life or his mockery of my interests as nerdy and worthless. College finally offered me freedom. I attended Stanford on a partial scholarship, majoring in computer science, while James stayed local at Illinois State. For the first time, I found myself in an environment where my skills were valued. I thrived in the competitive atmosphere, securing internships at tech companies each summer, building connections, and developing applications that earned recognition from professors and peers alike. After graduation, I landed a job at a promising startup in San Francisco, developing security software. The next 5 years were transformative. I climbed the corporate ladder, quickly eventually becoming the lead developer for their flagship product. The stock options I had been granted became valuable when the company was acquired by a tech giant. At 30, I had financial security that many people my age could only dream about. Meanwhile, James had followed a different trajectory. He graduated with a business degree and bounced between sales jobs, never quite finding his footing. He married Anna, his college girlfriend, and settled back in our hometown. Mom and Dad continued to support him emotionally and sometimes financially, always ready with excuses for his career setbacks or failed ventures. Despite my success, family gatherings still featured subtle reminders of my outsider status, with conversations revolving around James and Anna, their struggles framed as noble challenges, while my achievements were minimized as lucky breaks. Everything changed 3 months before last Christmas. During our monthly family video call, Mom mentioned that James had lost his job at the medical supply company where he had worked for 2 years. This was his third job loss in 5 years. Apparently, the company had restructured and his entire department had been eliminated. With 2 small children and a mortgage, the timing could not have been worse. For the next several weeks, I found myself thinking about James more than I had in years. Despite our difficult relationship, he was still my brother. Through our sister Lisa, I learned that the situation was dire. James was 3 weeks behind on rent, with Anna picking up extra nursing shifts to keep them afloat. Their landlord was threatening eviction if they missed another payment. An idea began to take shape in my mind. What if I could help James without the usual power dynamics getting in the way? I had the means to cover their rent for several months, giving them breathing room to find stable footing. Perhaps this act of generosity could begin healing the wounds between us. I convinced myself that this was my opportunity to be the bigger person, to extend an olive branch after years of distance. I calculated what 3 months of their rent would cost based on housing prices in their area and set aside the money, approximately $9,000. It was a significant amount, but manageable given my financial situation. I transferred the funds to a separate account and arranged for a certified check to be made out to their property management company. As Christmas approached, I felt a mixture of anxiety and hope. Would James accept my help graciously, or would he see it as another competition he was losing? I carefully placed the check in a simple white envelope, along with a short note explaining that this was 3 months of covered rent. No strings attached. I sealed it and packed it among the other presents for my flight home to Illinois. The night before the gift exchange, I barely slept, rehearsing in my mind how I would present the envelope, what I would say, and how James might react. I imagined gratitude, perhaps even tears, followed by a heartfelt embrace that would mark the beginning of a new chapter in our relationship. Looking back, my naivety seems almost comical. Christmas Eve arrived with the usual fanfare at my parents' suburban house. The towering pine tree in the living room sparkled with the same ornaments from my childhood, many handmade by us kids decades ago. The aroma of Mom's traditional ham and sweet potato casserole filled the air, mingling with the scent of cinnamon candles and pine. Outside, a light snow had begun to fall, creating the perfect backdrop for a holiday reunion. Everyone had gathered by 6 in the evening. Mom and Dad, now in their early 60s, bustled around with the energy of people 20 years younger. Lisa and her husband Thomas had driven in from Michigan with their teenage twins. James arrived last with Anna and their children, 5-year-old Emma and 3-year-old Noah. The kids immediately ran to the tree, counting presents and shaking boxes, while the adults exchanged hugs and caught up on recent events. Dinner was a lively affair, with conversations flowing between college applications for Lisa's twins, Dad's upcoming retirement plans, and local neighborhood gossip. I noticed that James remained unusually quiet, offering only brief responses when directly addressed. Anna compensated with forced cheerfulness, but the strain showed in the tight smile that never quite reached her eyes. Whenever the topic drifted toward work or finances, she skillfully redirected the conversation. After dinner came the moment I had been anticipating and dreading in equal measure, the gift exchange. Our family tradition dictated that we would gather in the living room, sitting in a circle, and take turns opening presents one at a time. This deliberate pace always extended the process for hours, with each gift being fully appreciated before moving to the next person. The first round of gifts were predictable sweaters, from Mom practical gadgets, from Dad handmade items from the kids. Lisa and Thomas gave everyone personalized photo albums. I received a new coffee machine from my parents and wireless headphones from Lisa's family. When it came time for James to open my regular gift, a collector's edition vinyl record of his favorite band, he seemed genuinely pleased, offering me a rare smile of appreciation. As the pile under the tree dwindled, I felt the weight of the envelope in my pocket grow heavier. The regular gift exchange was nearly complete, but I had been waiting for the right moment to present my special gift. When there was a natural lull in the proceedings, I cleared my throat and reached into my pocket. My heart raced as I stood up and approached James, who was sitting on the couch with Anna. The room quieted as everyone sensed something unplanned was happening. I extended the plain white envelope toward him. James looked surprised, taking it with a puzzled expression. Our parents leaned forward in their seats, curious. Lisa watched intently while trying to keep her twins from getting too rowdy. I will never forget what happened next. James tore open the envelope, pulled out the check and the note. He read it silently, his expression changing from confusion to something darker. Instead of gratitude, his face twisted into a smirk. He looked up not at me, but at our parents and Lisa. "Well, well," he said, waving the check like a trophy. "Looks like little Fernando tries to compensate for the fact that he is not needed by this family." The statement hung in the air for a moment, before James chuckled, breaking the tension. Then, to my horror, our father let out a laugh. Mom covered her mouth, but could not hide her smile. Lisa and Thomas exchanged glances before they too began laughing. Even Anna, who knew exactly how much they needed that money, let out a nervous giggle. The room erupted in laughter, as if James had delivered the punchline to the perfect joke. Everyone was laughing except me. I stood frozen, the blood draining from my face as years of exclusion crystallized in that single moment. The gift I had agonized over, the genuine attempt to help and heal, had been turned into another opportunity to put me in my place. With a calm I did not know I possessed, I reached out and took the envelope back from James's hand. His laughter faltered as our eyes met. "Useful to know," I said quietly, my voice barely audible above the dying laughter. The room fell silent as I turned away, walked to the coat rack by the front door, and calmly put on my jacket. No one spoke as I gathered my car keys and phone. It was only when I opened the front door that the spell broke. "Fernando, wait," Mom called, her voice tinged with sudden concern. "James was just joking around." I turned back one last time, taking in the scene my family still arranged around the Christmas tree presents, scattered around them, faces now showing confusion rather than mirth. I said nothing as I stepped out into the snowy night, closing the door firmly behind me. The drive back to my hotel was a blur. Snowflakes swirled in my headlights as I navigated the familiar streets of my hometown, now feeling more alien than ever before. My phone began buzzing almost immediately, but I ignored it, focusing instead on the road and the crushing weight in my chest. Once in my room, I turned off my phone completely and sat on the edge of the bed, still wearing my coat. Then, to my horror, our father let out a laugh. Mom covered her mouth, but could not hide her smile. Lisa and Thomas exchanged glances before they too began laughing. Even Anna, who knew exactly how much they needed that money, let out a nervous giggle. The room erupted in laughter, as if James had delivered the punchline to the perfect joke. Everyone was laughing except me. I stood frozen, the blood draining from my face as years of exclusion crystallized in that single moment. Most were from Mom and Lisa, a few from Dad, and surprisingly, none from James. The messages followed a predictable pattern: initial confusion, then defense of James's joke, followed by growing concern when I did not respond, and finally pleas to call them back. I read through them all, but replied to none. Instead, I sent a brief email to the entire family, explaining that I needed space and would be unavailable for the foreseeable future. The next week passed in a strange limbo. I returned to work, threw myself into coding, and began sessions with a therapist who specialized in family trauma. I declined calls from my family, but read their increasingly frantic messages. Lisa reported that Mom was distraught, Dad was confused, and James was acting as if nothing unusual had happened. Then, 8 days after Christmas, I received a call from an unfamiliar number. Against my better judgment, I answered. It was Anna calling from her work phone. "Fernando, please do not hang up," she began, her voice tight with stress. "I know what James did was terrible. I have been telling him that every day since you left, but we are in real trouble now." She explained that their landlord had served them with an eviction notice. They were now 2 months behind on rent, with no prospects for catching up. James had been unable to secure even interviews for new positions, and her nursing salary could not cover all their expenses. "I am not calling to ask for the money," she clarified quickly. "I just thought you should know what is happening. James would never call you himself, but the kids." Her voice broke, and I could hear her struggling to regain composure. I remained silent, processing this information. Part of me felt a grim satisfaction that James was facing consequences, but another part ached for my niece and nephew innocent in this adult conflict. "I will think about it" was all I could offer before ending the call. 2 days later, my parents called. Unlike their previous attempts, which I had ignored this time, I answered. Mom was crying. Dad was uncharacteristically humble. They were calling about James, of course. Always about James. "We do not know what to do," Dad admitted. "The kids might end up homeless. Your mother and I have already helped as much as we can with our retirement savings." "And you want me to solve the problem?" I stated, not asking. "Fernando, we know we have not always been fair to you," Mom said, surprising me. "But right now, it is not about James. It is about Emma and Noah." I agreed to consider helping on one condition: I wanted to speak with James directly in person. They readily agreed, probably assuming I would simply hand over the money after a perfunctory apology from him. I flew back to Illinois the following weekend and arranged to meet James at a coffee shop downtown rather than at my parents' house. I arrived early, selected a corner table with privacy, and waited. He arrived 15 minutes late, looking haggard and resentful. "Thanks for coming," I said, as he sat down, not offering to buy him coffee. "Not like I had a choice," he muttered, avoiding my eyes. "So are you going to help us, or not?" The directness of his question, devoid of any acknowledgement of his behavior, nearly made me walk out. Instead, I leaned forward. "That depends entirely on you, James. I am willing to cover 6 months of your rent, not just 3. I will also connect you with my network for job opportunities. But first, you need to understand exactly what you are asking for and what it will cost you." His eyes narrowed. "What do you want? Money back with interest?" I shook my head. "Nothing so transactional. I want a public apology. Not just to me in private, where no one will hold you accountable. I want you to apologize to me in front of our entire family, acknowledging exactly what you did and why it was wrong." James scoffed. "You cannot be serious. All this drama over a little joke." "It was never a joke to me," I replied calmly. "And that is my offer. Take it or leave it." We sat in tense silence for nearly a minute before he grudgingly agreed. I could see the calculation in his eyes: 6 months of rent versus a few moments of discomfort. For him, it was a simple equation. For me, it was the beginning of setting long overdue boundaries. I spent the next few days arranging a family dinner at one of Chicago's finest restaurants. I reserved a private dining room, ordered a premium menu, and personally called each family member to ensure their attendance. No one declined. The restaurant I chose was an upscale steakhouse in downtown Chicago, known for its privacy and impeccable service. The private dining room featured a long mahogany table, soft lighting from crystal chandeliers and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the illuminated cityscape. At $7,000 for the evening, it was an extravagant setting for what I considered long overdue family business. I arrived first, confirming the arrangements with the maitre d' and approving the wine selection. My parents arrived next, looking uncomfortable in the luxurious surroundings. Dad kept adjusting his tie, while Mom clutched her handbag like a lifeline. Lisa and Thomas followed, then finally James and Anna, who had left their children with a babysitter. The atmosphere was thick with tension as we were seated. I took the head of the table, a position traditionally reserved for my father at family gatherings. No one commented on this subtle shift in dynamics, but I noticed the exchanged glances. The first course was served in awkward silence. I allowed everyone to get comfortable with food and wine before addressing the purpose of our gathering. When the main course arrived, I gently tapped my glass with a spoon, drawing all eyes toward me. "Thank you all for coming tonight," I began. We sat in tense silence for nearly a minute before he grudgingly agreed. I could see the calculation in his eyes: 6 months of rent versus a few moments of discomfort. For him, it was a simple equation. For me, it was the beginning of setting long overdue boundaries. I spent the next few days arranging a family dinner at one of Chicago's finest restaurants. I reserved a private dining room, ordered a premium menu, and personally called each family member to ensure their attendance. He exhaled sharply, finally raising his eyes to meet mine. Something in his expression shifted, perhaps recognition of the power dynamic that had reversed after decades. "I apologize for humiliating you in front of our family," he began again, his voice stronger. "When you offered to help with our rent, instead of showing gratitude, I mocked you. I implied you were not valued or needed in this family, and I encouraged everyone to laugh at your expense. It was cruel, especially when you were trying to help us. I was wrong, and I am sorry." The table remained silent as he finished. Our parents looked stricken. Lisa wiped away a tear, and Thomas studied his plate intently. Anna squeezed James's hand in silent support. "Thank you," I said simply. Then I turned to address the entire table. "For as long as I can remember, I have been the outsider in this family. The joke, the afterthought, the one whose feelings did not quite matter as much. Christmas night was not an isolated incident. It was just the moment when I finally decided I deserved better." Mom started to object, but Dad placed a hand over hers silently, asking her to listen. "I do not share this to make anyone feel guilty, but because we cannot fix what we do not acknowledge. I have always loved this family, even when it hurt to be part of it. Now I need to know if you can accept me as I am, respect my boundaries, and treat me with the same consideration you automatically extend to each other." What followed was 2 hours of the most honest conversation our family had ever experienced. My parents, with tears in their eyes, admitted to their favoritism toward James and took responsibility for establishing a dynamic that allowed me to be diminished. Lisa acknowledged her complicity through silence. Even Thomas spoke up about noticing the pattern, but never feeling it was his place to intervene. James, perhaps most surprisingly, opened up about his own insecurities. "I always envied your intelligence and focus," he confessed. "When you started succeeding in your career, while I struggled, it was easier to keep putting you down than to admit you had figured something out that I could not." By the time dessert was served, we had established new ground rules for our family interactions. I made it clear that my help for James would come with healthy boundaries. I would cover 6 months of their rent paid directly to the landlord and connect James with my professional network, but there would be no more enabling of toxic behavior. Before we departed, I handed James a new envelope. Inside was not only the rent check, but also information about 3 promising job leads in his field. This time he accepted it, with genuine gratitude, embracing me for what felt like the first time in our adult lives. As we stood to leave, Dad approached me privately. "We failed you as parents," he said, his voice breaking. "I do not know if we can ever make that right, but I want you to know how proud I am of the man you have become, not despite us, but entirely on your own merit." That night marked the beginning of a transformation in our family dynamic that none of us could have anticipated, least of all me. 6 months after that pivotal dinner, the changes in our family were remarkable. James had secured a position with one of my connections, a medical technology company that valued his sales experience and offered better compensation than any of his previous jobs. He had made every rent payment on time since getting back on his feet, and had even begun repaying me in small monthly installments despite my assurances that it was unnecessary. More significant than the financial stability were the shifts in our relationships. Our parents made conscious efforts to connect with me, asking thoughtful questions about my work and life in San Francisco. Mom and I developed a Sunday morning ritual of video calls where we discussed everything from books to politics, discovering common interests that had been overlooked for decades. Dad began sending articles about technology innovations, his way of showing interest in my world. Lisa stepped up as the family mediator, organizing monthly virtual game nights that kept us connected despite the distance. Would James accept my help graciously, or would he see it as another competition he was losing? I carefully placed the check in a simple white envelope, along with a short note explaining that this was 3 months of covered rent. no strings attached. I sealed it and packed it among the other presents for my flight home to Illinois. The night before the gift exchange, I barely slept, rehearsing in my mind how I would present the envelope, what I would say, and how James might react. She made sure everyone had equal speaking time and gently redirected conversations when old patterns threatened to emerge. The most profound change was with James. Our relationship would never be the effortless bond that some brothers enjoy, but we had established something arguably more valuable: mutual respect. Our conversations, once landmines of potential conflict, became increasingly comfortable. I arrived in Illinois with cautious optimism and was met at the airport by James himself, a gesture that would have been unimaginable a year earlier. At my parents' house, I found not just my immediate family, but also extended relatives and a few childhood friends, all gathered specifically to celebrate me. The thoughtfulness of the event was evident in every detail. The cake featured an edible image of my first computer coding project. Gifts reflected genuine consideration of my interests rather than generic offerings. Most touching was a memory book they had compiled, filled with positive recollections and photographs where I was not on the periphery but at the center. That evening, as we sat on the back porch watching fireflies emerge in the summer twilight, James handed me a beer and took the chair beside me. "I never thought I would say this," he began, "but you standing up to all of us was the best thing that could have happened to this family, to me specifically." "How so?" I asked. "It forced me to look at myself, really look for the first time in my life. I did not like what I saw." He paused, taking a sip of his beer. "I was so used to being the golden child that I never developed the resilience you have. When things got tough, I expected bailouts. You expected to solve problems yourself, and that made you stronger." We sat in companionable silence for a moment before he continued. "Anna tells me I am a better husband and father now, more present, less bitter. That is because of you. The healing process has not been perfectly linear. There are still moments when old wounds throb, when a careless comment or overlooked invitation triggers memories of exclusion. The difference now is that I address these issues directly rather than burying the hurt, and my family listens when I speak. I have learned that standing up for yourself does not mean burning bridges. Sometimes it means building stronger ones with proper foundations. The boundaries I established were not walls to keep my family out, but guidelines for how to come closer in healthier ways. The most surprising discovery has been my capacity for forgiveness. Not the kind that excuses or forgets harm, but the kind that acknowledges it while choosing to move forward, unburdened by resentment. This forgiveness was a gift I gave myself first, then extended to my family as they demonstrated change. If you have ever felt like an outsider in your own family, know that your worth is not determined by their recognition. Sometimes, the greatest act of self-love is refusing to accept treatment that diminishes you even from those you care about most. Have you ever had to stand up to family members to protect your self-worth? Share your experience in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button, subscribe to my channel for more authentic life stories, and share with someone who might need to hear that they deserve respect, especially from those closest to them. Thank you for listening to my journey, and remember, sometimes the most meaningful family bonds are not the ones we are born into, but the ones we consciously create through courage, boundaries, and mutual respect.